Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca, and in this week's video, I'm coloring my viewers' line art. In a recent video, I was going through some old files, and I found some art from my old videos where I would color line art submitted by all of you. That got me thinking that this would be a fun idea to revisit. So I posted on my community tab asking all of you to submit line art, and a lot of you did. In those old videos, I would use the same art supply for all of the pictures. However, this time around, I'm going to use a different art supply for each picture. This will keep things from feeling too repetitive for myself and also allow me to use supplies that I haven't used in a while. Also, all of the art pieces were randomly picked. I had a hard time picking which ones to color because there were so many wonderful options. And the first piece that was chosen was submitted by Reagan. Not my sister Reagan, but a different Reagan. They're pieces of a moth fairy, and when I saw it, I thought it was super cute and looked fun to color. So yeah, let's get started. For this picture, I'm using Arrtx color pencils, and for the colors, I'll mostly be using a mixture of purples and greens. These colors right here are what I call my interest colors. They're mostly to make the highlights or shadows more interesting. I'm starting by laying down lighter coats of the base colors. This gets a base coat of the colors on the page that will help with blending things later. I have found that if I try to go straight into blending colors without laying down a base coat, I don't like the result as much because I don't have the base color blending with the rest of the colors that I put down. The base coat kind of helps things feel more unified. Like I said, my plan is to mostly use purple and green, but I will also be leaving some areas white, like the skin and hair. For the white areas, I will shade them with really light greens and purples so that they still feel cohesive with the rest of the coloring. I'm not totally sure why I chose green and purple for this picture. When I looked at it, I instantly thought green and purple for some reason, so I went with it. Once I had the base colors mapped out, I go on to build up the colors and also use a technique called burnishing to make the colors blend more while also reducing the appearance of the white specks in the coloring. Burnishing is kind of just a fancy word for pressing hard on your pencil so that the pigment goes into the paper. So like a lot of times paper has a kind of bumpy texture to it. When you color lightly on a piece of paper, the pigment goes on just the slightly raised parts of the bumpy paper texture. Since the pencil is only lightly touching the surface, the pigment is not able to get into the deeper parts of the paper texture. This is what gives us the white speckled texture. If we want to reduce the amount of white speckles, we have to press the pigment into the paper so that we can get into the texture and smoothen things out. You usually want to save burnishing for a later part in the coloring process, since a lot of times once you burnish a section, it is harder to build up colors on top of the section because the paper texture isn't as prominent once burnished. It's not like impossible to add more color, it's just a little bit more tricky, and things can also kind of start to look really waxy. I usually end up burnishing with multiple different colors for each section. I'm doing a mixture of blending while also burnishing. I'll press really hard in an area that I want to burnish with one color, and as I move to an area that I want to burnish with a different color, I will lighten my pressure so that I get a decently smooth transition between colors. When picking my mixture of greens and purples, I try to have my shadow colors be more on the cold side and my highlights be more on the warm side. So like green gets more yellow for the lighter parts and the purple gets to be more of a magenta for the highlights. Having the shift in hue helps the coloring to be more interesting. Something I do sometimes is I will burnish with a white color pencil. I will often use white to burnish for areas that I want to be really light in color or that I need to blend out to white. I do this on the mushroom as well as for the skin. I've never had them, but you can also get special pencils that are made just for burnishing. My understanding is that they are filled with just the base that is used for color pencils and there is no pigment added. This allows artists to burnish without adding pigment or changing the colors that are laid down. Like I said, I've never really had one, but I've always kind of wanted to try them. Also, my original plan was to keep the hair white, but I felt like the white was really blending into the skin and not allowing for the hair to have its own shape, so I decided to color it. I felt like the bottom of the piece felt very purple heavy because of the mushroom, so to balance things out, I made the hair purple. Like I mentioned for my coloring choices, I have my colors get warmer the lighter they get to make the coloring more interesting. And another thing I do to add interest is I add really light yellow and blue to the opposite sides of the character and the mushroom. The yellow is coming from the main light source and the blue is a sort of bounce light. I always really like adding these colors. I feel like it makes the coloring really fun and kind of pop. I honestly can't really remember the last time I fully colored with colored pencils. Oh wait, I do remember. It was the video I did where I redrew my husband's art. I totally forgot about that. The video was a lot of fun, and I did enjoy working with the color pencils. However, as usual, the color pencils always start to hurt my hands. It mostly hurts because of the burnishing process, since I have to apply a good amount of pressure to the pencils. Having to apply pressure for extended amounts of time starts to hurt. And because of this, I don't work with color pencils super often. I don't mind using them lightly in my sketchbook, but they are not my first go-to for illustrations. Which is a bit sad because they are a lot of fun to use and also really relaxing to color with, since you don't have to worry about things drying, and they are also very predictable compared to something like watercolor. I always feel like watercolor is really unpredictable. Even though my hand was kind of starting to cramp up by the end of this picture, I had a ton of fun coloring it. I'm kind of a sucker for fantasy fairy stuff, so coloring this moth fairy was super fun. Thank you so much, Reagan, for submitting your art for me to color. The character is so cute and unique. I hope you like how I colored your picture. The next randomly picked piece was created by Firefly Lights. I love your art style, and you did a great job drawing all of the curls. It must have been so tedious. For this picture, I wanted to use watercolor. Sadly, my printer was unable to print the line art onto my watercolor paper because it's too thick. So instead of watercolor paint, I'm going to use watercolor brush pens. The brush pens can give me that watercolor type of look, but also work well with thinner mixed media paper. The brush pens I chose to use are from the pastel set of Tombow brush markers. I've had these for ages and have only ever used them in my sketchbooks, so I was excited to try to use them for a more finished colored piece. Oh, but since I didn't have a skin tone, I did grab some Arrtx water brush markers for the skin. And speaking of the skin, that is what I am starting with. I'm going to start by applying my deep peach color to areas where I want there to be shadows or blush. For some spots where I want the colors to fade out a bit more, I'm using the colorless blender that came with the pastel set of markers. And I have to say, I'm kind of surprised by how well the blender worked. It made the edges blend out in a really satisfying way. I was trying my best to use the blender right after putting the color on the paper, so that the color didn't have too much time to seep in and dry into the paper. And this allows it to move and blend a bit more easily. Once my first pass of shadow was done, I felt like I could deepen it a little bit, so I went in with my darker peach color. I was starting to feel a bit scared and apprehensive when adding this color because it felt kind of powerful, but I was hoping once I added more colors it would look okay. However, since the shadows were getting very dark, it made the areas of the skin that were still white really stand out and not feel very natural. So to add a bit of a light wash, I colored with my marker on a paint palette and added a little bit of water. Then I take a brush and basically use it like watercolor paint. This did work really well for adding a light amount of color. However, I did make the mistake of allowing my brush to be a little bit too wet. Some areas ended up having a lot of water and the ink ended up kind of feathering out, especially around the fingers. But it wasn't bad enough for me to feel like I needed to start over. I kind of just tried to redefine areas with the coloring and shading. So if you've been tuning into my videos for the past several weeks, you most likely know that the past several videos have all been videos that I pre-made before having the baby, so I could have some time off after the baby was born. And well, this was technically also one of those pre-made videos, but it didn't get done in time. I did all of the filming for the coloring, and on the day that I was supposed to start the editing process, I went into labor. I had woken up in the middle of the night due to pain and found that my water had broke. I ended up going into labor 2 weeks early. It was a little bit funny because when this video went up that was about me prepping for the baby and how the baby was coming soon, I had actually already had the baby. I went into labor a few days after getting that video done and scheduling it to go up. So this video is kind of a soft comeback for me. This is the first full video audio I've recorded since giving birth. I say full video audio because I recorded the reaction part with Reagan for this video like a week or two ago. So yeah, I'm back, kind of. The next video I make will be the true comeback video. I will talk more in depth about how things have been, the baby, and all that jazz. I want to keep this video more focused on the art, since I have a lot to say about all the things that have happened over the past handful of weeks, and I don't want all of that to dominate this video. Okay, Peanut. Mama's coming.
Many hours later.
Okay, Baby is down for another nap, so I'm back. So let's talk about the art. For the hair, I'm switching back and forth between a lighter and darker yellow. I apply the darker yellow where I want the shadows to be, and then I blend out the darker color by using the lighter yellow. Like with the skin, I try to switch between colors pretty quickly so that the blend is smoother. One of the reasons I chose yellow for the hair is that for some reason yellow often looks the least streaky for water-based markers. I'm not sure why that is. It doesn't matter what brand the markers are, lighter yellows just look less streaky for some reason. I'm assuming it has something to do with yellow being super light in value, but I'm not totally sure. Although I have to say that overall the Tombow markers do a very nice job blending into themselves, and they aren't super streaky. Like for some water-based markers, it's nearly impossible to hide the streakiness, but for these I felt like it was pretty easy to get a fairly smooth look. Of course, they still have that water brush texture, but that's the texture I was wanting. If I wanted things to be super duper smooth, I would just use alcohol-based markers. These were a nice middle ground of some texture, but not too much texture. I honestly kind of want to buy some more sets of these because they are really nice. Maybe I'll ask for some for Christmas or my birthday. There's something about the look and texture of watercolor that I always really love. And in this case, I really liked the texture that I ended up getting, even though I was using markers instead of paint. Working with these markers was nice because they allowed for a slightly more controlled experience and also allowed me to work on the thinner paper. I can technically use watercolors on this mixed media paper, like I did kind of use watercolor for the skin, but if I was using only watercolors for this piece, it would most likely cause the paper to buckle, and I never like the look of paper buckling. It always bothers me. So I prefer to use watercolors on thicker watercolor paper since it doesn't buckle as much. Oh, and I guess if you don't know what buckling is, basically if you add a lot of water to paper, it starts to make it get wavy. And in more extreme cases, it gets really bumpy, like a bunch of hills and valleys all over your paper. So yeah, I try to avoid that. Anyways, I felt like I needed to add something to the background, so I drew a bunch of different heart shapes and dots with different marker colors. I felt like this fit with the kind of birthday theme that this character has. And so here's the finished coloring of the line art. Thank you so much Firefly Lights for letting me color your art. It's super cute and was a ton of fun to work with. I really enjoyed the process. The last piece was created by Nana. The character is super cute and I'm excited to color her. For this picture, I'm going to use Ohuhu alcohol-based markers, and the color scheme I chose is mostly made up of pink, red, and brown. I chose these colors since I wanted to try to use colors that I didn't really use in the previous pieces. Like with the previous piece, I'm starting with the skin. I tend to start with the skin because it is the part that I want to turn out the best. So if I make a mistake while coloring that kind of ruins the skin, I can simply start over by printing out the line work again. If I were to wait to color the skin and something goes wrong, it makes starting over a bit more painful since I spent more time on the picture, so hence why I often start with the skin. Thankfully though, coloring the skin went smoothly. You may notice that I applied a bit of the skin color to the hair. I often see artists do this to make the transition between the hair and the skin softer, and it also kind of brightens things up a bit, so I thought I'd give it a try. After I applied the base skin color, I go into different sections with my two shading colors. For each of the sections, I switch quickly between the shadow colors and my base color to make the transition between colors more smooth. Of course, I don't want all of the shadows to be soft, so for areas where I want a harder edge, I don't blend it out with my base color. I kept the shadows under the hair and neck on the harder side, but blended out most of the other shading on the face. Also, the paper I'm using is basic cardstock printer paper. It has a very smooth texture and is on the thicker side, so it works really well with markers. Plus, it's pretty inexpensive. I sometimes get comments from viewers saying that they have a hard time making the markers look smooth, and paper can actually play a big role in this. I find that if I'm using paper that is more absorbent, I have a harder time making smooth layers, and things will look a bit more streaky, compared to if I'm using paper that allows for the ink to kind of sit on top of it a little longer. It's easier to blend the ink around. Also, it's really helpful to let a good amount of the ink sink into the paper when you're applying the base coat of color. If you don't let the ink evenly soak into the paper, you'll end up with lighter and darker patches, and this is what results in an unsmooth look. After the skin, I decided to move on to the hair, and man, it was a long process to color it. But I am really happy with the end result. It's never fun when you spend a long time working on something and then you don't like it. So I'm happy that I do. All of the effort was worth it. For the hair, I'm working on it kind of section by section. I'm doing things this way since once again, I want to work while the ink is wet to make smoother colors. I lay down the base color and then proceed to add darker colors. I apply these colors with a flicking motion to give the hair some texture. I make sure to flick the brush in the direction the hair is flowing to make the appearance of a hair strand texture. The browns do get pretty dark, but I tried my best to use the lightest brown by the face and also slightly used my skin tone base color to lighten it a bit. That is an interesting part about markers. You're able to go over darker colors with lighter colors, and when they dry, the darker color will be lighter than it was before. This isn't a technique I use super often since it can be a bit unpredictable and sometimes you get a funny texture if you overdo it. But in some cases like this, you get a decent result. This is also something I'll do to fix mistakes, like if I color a little bit outside my line art, I'll use a colorless blender a few times to lift the color out. Once again, it doesn't always work, but if the color isn't too dark, it can be pretty effective. To make the hair look extra shiny, I tried to switch back and forth between the highlights and shadows. Providing this contrast between the darker and lighter colors results in a more shiny look. And I really like to render shiny hair. I got a question from a patron a while back asking, besides eyes, what's my other favorite part to draw? And my answer was hair. It can be a bit tedious or a pain in the bum sometimes, but it's still one of my favorite parts to draw and color. I think it's because it offers so many different possibilities in how it can be drawn and rendered. I mean, this is technically true for all parts of a picture, but I guess for me, I play around with hair more than I do other parts. Like I said, coloring the hair was a very long process, so I actually didn't film all of it, so we are going to jump ahead to when I'm working on coloring the clothes. I do apologize for this, but it would have been so much footage for all of the hair. For the clothes, I'm mostly using red with accents of pink. At first, I was apprehensive to use pink as my accent color because I wasn't sure if I'd like it in combo with the red. But then my brain was like, well, Amy's colors are pink and red, and you always like how that looks. And I was like, you're right, brain, I do. So I went with pink and red. Like I said, I chose these colors because I was trying to pick colors that I didn't really use in the previous pieces. And overall, I feel like for illustrations, I tend to shy away from using red. I lean more towards cooler or softer colors a lot of times. I do always love the vividness of red and how powerful it is, but that may also be why I stray away from it. It can feel a bit overpowering or intimidating to work with. In this case, I'm fairly pleased with how the shading of the red turned out. I spent a super long time trying to pick the right shading colors. Part of me did consider using red as the accent color for the tiny details, but the idea of using red for the tiny spots that are really easy to mess up made me nervous. Hence why I'm using the pink. It's a lot more forgiving. So for the eyes, I wasn't sure how I wanted to color them. I felt like my usual way of coloring wouldn't work for the iris style. I decided to go with a pink gradient that gets lighter towards the bottom, and to add some shine, I don't color a circle band within the eye itself. This was supposed to kind of mimic the lower highlight I add to my digital eyes, but it didn't quite end up looking like that. It's a different look from my usual, but I feel like overall it fits with these kind of eyes, I hope. I wanted to keep the eyes pretty light so that they stayed pink and didn't start to veer towards red. Also, I tried using a lighter color to potentially add some subtle shiny highlights, but it didn't quite work. I honestly didn't really like how they looked, but I didn't want to mess things up more, so I just let them be, since I felt like if I tried to fix them, it would call more attention to them. Whereas right now, I feel like they're not very noticeable. For the background, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but after a lot of thinking, I just decided to add a red slanted stripe and a large pink slanted stripe. It's simple, but it makes the background not feel so empty. And so here are all the pieces I colored in this video. I want to say thank you so much to everyone that submitted their line art. Like I said, there were so many pictures I wanted to color that I had to randomly pick. There are just way too many amazing pictures to choose from. If you all enjoyed this video, and if it does well, maybe I'll do another video in this series sometime soon. If you want to help support this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you aren't subscribed, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. It'll help out the video and also help out the channel. Speaking of helping out the channel, thank you so much to my wonderful YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!